a culture-first organization. We were on a mission to change the workers' compensation law firms and the way that injured workers were treated. The system is a difficult place to be, and that's why we do what we do, and every day we're trying to get better.
I don't think people understand just how fragile their circumstances can be at times. I've seen lives and families and jobs crumble apart. Over time, as I've represented more and more people and dealt with insurance companies, I think the term workers' compensation has morphed into, workers' justice more than anything else. It's not just about compensation anymore. It's about fighting for what's right.
Our desire to serve our community through the work that we do is the most important thing. The things we do for our community, it's not just writing checks, it's about helping.
I slipped, fell, rotated my body, planked on my left side. I wasn't sure what happened and why it happened. And so I knew that I needed another advocate to get me the care that I was looking for. I came across Pacific Workers' Compensation. They went and got me answers. They went and took action. When I speak to them, I feel like I'm the only person that they have, and they treat me that way. They will work very hard to resolve any issue that comes up in your case.
Our mission is to give back as much as possible to our community. We go to churches, we do food drives, we donate time and efforts to helping out the firefighters and their causes. And we want to ensure that our community is taken care of just as we are.
Being a culture-driven organization is the most important thing for me as an owner. The Hero Award is something that we developed a few years ago. It's not just an important award, it's the most important thing because it embodies every core value. Everything that we set up, the Hero Award embodies that. It embodies what we are to the people of this community. Our clients have expectations of us to fight for them, to call them back, to communicate with them. This is about going above and beyond. This is about helping them where they could never have expected it. As a group, we're tenacious. We won't stop until the job gets done. That's who we are.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the one QME mistake that can ruin your entire workers' comp webinar. My name is Carmen, your host. I hope everyone can hear me very well. If you can hear me, please go on the chat and say yes, 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 yes. We love to see everyone engage on your live chat. Whether you are watching this on YouTube or you're watching this directly on the link that was sent to your email, we want to know who's here. Let us know where you guys are tuning in from. Of course, Bilal Kassem is joining us as well. Bilal, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you for joining us once again. We host these monthly webinars and hope to be able to educate the injured workers here in the state of California. This webinar is truly meant for educational purposes, to be honest with you. It's going to give you the information that the insurance company would not want you to know, most importantly, that they wouldn't share with you. And it's super fun for us to kind of really get to connect with the people that need the help the most, which is injured workers. You're already battling a very difficult and complex system. So the last thing we want to do is leave you hanging out dry. So thank you to everyone that's on here. I do see Paloma on here. I do see our team as well on the back end, which, by the way, let me make some quick announcements. If at any point you would love to discuss a one-on-one conversation with our team, they are ready on the chats. We are going to be providing a QR code as well that is going to allow you to connect directly, cut the line, and have a priority one-on-one chat with experts who can help you answer some questions that are exclusively to your case. Therefore, you don't have to share a lot of personal information on the chats. We all know that some information we want to keep to ourselves. So therefore, you have that option, and it's going to be popping up throughout the screen as well. For this presentation, we are going to be sharing the screen. Therefore, we would love for you guys to follow along with us as well, and hope to stick to the end, because that's when you get to do the Q&A session with Bilal Kassem. Bilal is going to be answering these questions, and hopes to kind of help you and guide you and let you know that, one, there's options, two, you're not alone, and three, there's actually good people in the workers' comp system, or in the workers' comp world. Bilal, how many times have you heard a client that, or someone that you've helped, say they feel so alone in the system?
I mean, most, I would say. I think it's unfortunately it's an old system. It's got a lot of, nuance to it, a lot that people aren't really familiar with. For the people who've been in it for a while, I think they start to understand that that's just how it is. They're not singled out, but unfortunately, it happens to a lot of people.
It definitely does. Well, I'm glad that we're able to potentially help people navigate this difficult system. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And with that, again, this is the one QME mistake that can kill your entire case, your claim, everything you've been fighting for. So we're going to highly suggest to stick to the end, because we have so many strategies to share with you that are going to help you navigate how complex the system can be, and how not to make one of the biggest mistakes we constantly see in our law firm as well with Pacific workers. There's also going to be a lot of information in regards to the basics of a qualified medical evaluator, which we're going to be abbreviating as a QME. And we're going to touch on that one critical mistake. We're also going to be telling you what other mistakes that they're not as critical, but can still contribute to your pitfall, and you don't want to go that route. So we're going to be sharing that as well. And if it has already happened, oopsies happened, what is the course that you take to correct it? And then, of course, at the end, we'll have the live Q&A and the next steps. So I hope you guys get to move along with us along with this webinar and try to navigate this entire system with us together. So let's talk about the QME timeline. Bilal, I guess, would love to hear, what is a QME, and can you tell us a little bit about what this timeline looks like when you're in a QME?
Of course. So QME, like you said, is an abbreviation for Qualified Medical Evaluator. These are physicians, including chiropractors, who do evaluations for workers' compensation cases. I think the important thing to understand about QMEs is that they are not doctors that are there to actually treat your injuries. They are what's called med legal evaluators, meaning they are weighing in on medical legal issues in the case. So they're there to evaluate you. They're there to look at your medical records, and they're there to give their opinion and make decisions about your case, not to provide treatment. QMEs typically come up into a case when there is a dispute. Usually it's a medical dispute, not a legal or a factual dispute about the scope of your case. Disputes can range from a variety of topics. Disputes can be about medical treatment recommendations by your doctor. They can be about temporary disability or disability status, as well as work restrictions, future medical care, or even whether or not you were injured in the first place. So these QMEs will typically show up either by you requesting or the insurance company requesting one. Usually when there's a primary treating physician report or a decision about liability that's made in the case, which usually happens pretty early on. So the QMEs do come up pretty fast in a workers' compensation case, and they're hugely important to the direction, and not just the direction, but the outcome of the case as well. When we talk about how to get a QME, it's a pretty straightforward process, although it's recognizing when to do it is the most important, and how you go about doing it that's most important.
Right.
Which, there's a couple different ways to do that. But the primary point is you request a QME panel from the state. The state then issues a panel. The panel has 3 different evaluators on there. If you're an unrepresented injured worker, you get to pick the QME. If you're represented, then each party gets to strike a doctor of their choosing. In the world that we live in, of course, the applicant and their attorney strike the doctor they don't like. The insurance company strikes the doctor they don't like. And the doctor that no one struck is supposed to be serving as your QME. And the idea is that they're supposed to be a neutral party that is there to weigh in impartially about your case. Once you get that QME selected, then it comes time to schedule the appointment, which will take usually around at minimum 30 days, usually 60 to 90 days. And that's to actually get your appointment. Yeah, it can take quite a while. And I think that's kind of shocking to a lot of people when they first realize, like, hey, I've got this urgent medical dispute in my case, but I'm not even going to get to see this person for perhaps 2 to 3 months. But that is a realistic timeline, and that's what they're legally allowed to schedule out for under the workers' compensation laws here in California. And then once you get to your appointment, the doctor will do an evaluation. They'll review your medical records if the insurance company held up their end and actually provided the records to the QME, which is a separate problem. But after the eval, the doctor has 30 days to issue their report. So, all in, just to get your QME report, you could be looking at, potentially 4 or 5 months.
Oh my gosh. There's one big issue with the workers' comp system, the slowness of the system just to get things moving along. Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, I think we don't have a lot of expedited resolutions in workers' compensation, and in civil court, for example, if someone's harassing you and you want to get a restraining order, you can go in and get an emergency restraining order like same day. Workers' compensation operates at a snail's pace, and that's usually just because of the system, the rules, and just honestly the volume in which people are injured. There's no easy and fast way to deal with claims for injured workers, unfortunately. And so, I think as priority as your health and welfare are, unfortunately, there's some pretty long waiting times in workers' comp.
That sucks. So it's definitely a waiting game. So I have a question for you, Bilal. If someone just opened up a workers' comp claim, they're just starting the system, where in a timeline would they see a qualified medical evaluator? Like, would this be right at the beginning, or how does this fit into a claims timeline?
Sure. So QMEs can show up in a case at any time. It just depends on who requests it and when and why. There are probably two of the very most common scenarios in which case, a QME is used, and that's either after the insurance company has just flat out denied liability for the case, meaning we're not going to provide you any medical treatment, we're not going to provide you any benefits, the case is just over. We disagree with the fact that you've been injured and we're not going to help you. That's usually scenario number one. Scenario number two is usually when there is a bad treating physician report. When someone gets injured, they're sent to the preferred workers' comp industrial clinic for the insurance company, which they're preferred for a reason, right? They're usually not going to be on the injured worker's side. Typically, the industrial clinic is incentivized in order to stay within the medical network for the insurance carrier to limit the cost of claims and to get you back to work as soon as possible, which means you probably have a disagreement with the direction that the treating physician is going, in which case you would want to request a QME. So those two issues pop up fast. Insurance companies only have 90 days to make a decision about liability for a workers' comp case. And usually when you don't get good vibes from your treating physician, it's pretty fast. I think it's very rare that someone would be with a treating physician they hate for, 2 years and then decide, hey, this person's been awful to me for 2 years, so I want to get a QME. Usually it's pretty quick that I think you would do those things. And strategically, it benefits you to get a QME faster because of your ability to pick the panel specialty as well, which really matters.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about what a QME does positively to a case, to a claim, to someone that is trying to fight the system? How does the QME have this high impact? What's the positivity behind it?
So when we talk about what happens in workers' comp, there's, how decisions are made. There is a administrative law judge. The judge is not by any means a medical expert. Neither are we. The doctors are the medical experts. And so really when the judges make decisions about case, they're relying on the medical experts, at least as far as medical issues are concerned. And typically what we see is that the treating doctors, the person that you see for your medication, your injections, whatever it is, their job is to treat you. And that's what they're good at, to the extent they're authorized to by utilization review, which is, another topic we talked about. But, their primary focus is there to, give you the care you need to get better, not to write reports. And so when we think about QMEs being the evaluators in work comp cases, their sole job is to write reports and evaluate you. And so when we're talking about what the judge will rely on in making decisions about your case, typically it's the QME report that carries the most weight, because their whole entire existence is to review all your medical records and write thorough narrative reports about everything they're supposed to. And so when we talk about how important the QMEs are, we're really talking about, them kind of holding the life of your case in their hands.
Yeah.
If they write a really bad report for you, sometimes you can get the primary treating physician to write a rebuttal report to the QME, and there's some good doctors that will spend the time to do that. But sometimes it's very difficult to get a report from the treating physician to compete with the QME report. And all things created equal, usually it's the QME report that the judge will be relying on, because it's typically much more thorough.
Got
And
it.
again, when we're talking about the issues, we're talking about whether or not you even have a case,
Right.
whether you should be collecting temporary disability benefits or not, whether or not you're entitled to any permanent disability for your injuries or future medical care, and what body parts are involved. So these are all like major, major, major issues for your workers' compensation case that oftentimes the QME is the person that actually decides.
Okay, so that makes sense. Obviously, after the way that the timeline of the QME was set out in the actual presentation, the part where it says your benefits and case direction make total sense now, because depending on what that doctor reports or where this leads, it's where your case heads, right? So can we talk a little bit about um, what what does an injured worker want to see in their QME report? What Obviously we need to be accurate with pinpointing what is hurting us and be truthful about what's happening to our body, but what does the QME look for?
So I think, there's not a one size fits all approach to QMEs. Some people, they want their QME to give them the most permanent disability possible, the most work restrictions, the most significant report medically and financially for them, so that this can be kind of their retirement case, or so that they can move on with life and go do something else, or so even just so that, if they're really suffering, that everything that they're legally entitled to is provided to them. There's
Mhm.
other people who want to minimize their injuries. We deal a lot with police officers and firefighters. And the firefighters in particular, they get beat up. I think they lift a lot more heavy equipment and deal with a lot more intense stuff than police would be doing day to day, I think, at least what I see. And so a lot of firefighters come to us with minor injuries, and these minor injuries still keep them off of work for a little bit.
Mhm.
Still give them some trouble. They still have aches and pains and problems after medical treatment's done, but they don't want to be on retirement. They don't want to be forced out of their job. Maybe they're just on the fire department for 2 years and they want to continue working for the next 18 years. And so they want the QME to essentially, kind of downplay the scope of their limitations and restrictions and disabilities, so that they can continue on back to work. But generally, you want to see a QME report that supports whatever it is that you would like to accomplish with your case, provided, of course, that when things like permanent disability or benefits are at issue, that the QME is on your side for those things, that the QME is turning every stone, they're addressing every body part, they're ensuring that they're giving you the most accurate permanent disability rating possible. And so really, I think, at least what we do at our firm is, oftentimes we'll discuss what the QME is with our clients, and we'll talk about what it is the outcome they're looking for. And when we're preparing for the QME evaluation, we may write a cover letter, the QME, kind of indicating what our theory of the case is and what we'd like to see happen.
Mhm.
Obviously, the defense is going to write theirs too, but I think it's critical that there's some level of direction that you're hoping to get and hoping to convey to the QME when you go there. That way, to the extent possible, you can get a report from the QME that'll support you.
Yeah, so it seems like QMEs are pretty heavy and important within a workers' comp claim. If you're tuning in just right now, I do want to invite you to reach out, take advantage of the webinar. We do have an entire team behind the scenes who is giving priority one-on-one strategies for those that are seeking to get more questions answered specifically to their case. So you can either call us. We're going to be putting the phone number on the screen where you guys can call us directly to the 510-686-6008. Or you can also on the chat let us know that you're interested in this priority level strategy that is going to be allowing you to speak about your case, and then kind of guiding you as to what you can do and how we can help. And then if you do want to have that conversation on a video chat, then you can do so as well on the chats and just let the teams know, or you can click on the link that's showing up on the screen right now. And that's for both. If you are watching live on YouTube, then we highly suggest to put it on the chats because YouTube doesn't allow us to click on screens. And for those of you guys that are watching it on the actual webinar platform, then you can do so just directly on the screen. So Bilal, we've talked about the positivity about the QME. Now let's get to the most important part about this webinar. And that is that one QME mistake that can kill your entire claim, just like this. It sucks. It happens. So I really want us to pinpoint the mistake in plain language. When someone mishandles their QME as a lawyer, and you deal with this constantly on a daily basis, what is that one mistake that injured workers do that you're just like, oh, there goes the case?
I mean, there's a lot, to be honest. There's probably more than one if I really wanted to dig in. The reality of it is the biggest mistake I see is going to the wrong QME. That is by far the biggest mistake that I see happen. A lot of clients. Well, let me start with this. When you go to a QME, generally on a case, you get one QME.
Right.
If there's multiple body parts and systems involved in a case, you get more than one QME, right? You get, like, let's say you have a back injury. You don't get to see a chiropractic QME, an orthopedic QME, and a pain medicine QME. You'll get one of those specialties because all of them are qualified to address your back injury. If you have, for example, a back injury and you have your diabetes has been aggravated because of your back injury and complications from treatment and such, you would need to see not only, for example, an orthopedic QME or pain medicine QME, you need to see an internist as well in QME. So you get to see different QMEs for different body parts and systems to the extent they're there. To the extent they're not, you get one. Which means if you pick that one QME and you pick the wrong QME, your whole case is going to be tanked.
Yeah.
We see this a lot. A lot of clients come to us early on in the case, which is great because we can help them through that process and we can pick the QME for them. Other times, a lot of people come to us because they feel like they got a really bad QME. And once that is in motion, it's very hard to get rid of it. There's tools that we can use to try to either cross-examine the doctor, question the doctor, or even get the doctor kicked off of the case in certain circumstances. But those aren't for sure things. And so oftentimes, if you do have a bad QME, it can be very difficult to deal with that throughout the rest of the case. And so a lot of people don't understand kind of the gamesmanship that goes on in selection of the QME. They don't understand that there's certain QMEs that have affiliations with certain medical practices that are insurance oriented. There's QMEs that are extremely conservative, regardless of whether or not they have medical practice that has some financial incentive to please insurance companies. And so you have to know what you're getting into. You have to know the right doctor you're picking. You have to know the right specialty.
Yeah.
Just a little tidbit. One of the most common problems I see is people who pick orthopedic QMEs when they go and they get injured because they have a physical injury to their bones, joints, or ligaments, and they think that is going to be the most appropriate given their medical specialty. Where in reality is for back injury, typically we see chiropractic or pain medicine doctors giving the most favorable reports. And that just happens to be because I think pain medicine doctors tend to be more liberally oriented towards injured workers, look at things more holistically. And chiropractors are the same thing. So, we typically see that there's certain doctors and certain specialties that are more favorable to the injured worker, and picking the wrong one, picking the wrong doctor could be catastrophic for your case.
Right. I mean, there's, like you mentioned, a lot of big one mistake that can derail your entire case. How about treating a QME doctor as a normal doctor visit and as a routine? So, and I've seen this where the patients are very impatient, and unfortunately, they tend to be rude with the QME because it's like, oh, you had me waiting outside, thinking that you were supposed to be touched, seen. Let's say I have an injury in my hand. You're expecting the person or the QME to truly take a look at your hand and try to tell you, does this hurt? Does that hurt? I mean, treating the QME like a routine doctor visit. Can you tell us why this hurts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is ultimately what I was trying to get at, with my comment as well is, it's really eh, the biggest mistake is just treating the QME appointment like it's anything else. Like it's, having a laissez-faire attitude towards, oh, it's just an evaluation, it's just another doctor, it's not a big deal. And that includes everything from picking the right doctor, like I was spending time discussing, or even the preparation for it. And preparation doesn't mean just actually, reading what a QME is, but like actually preparing for it, like thinking about what body parts are involved in your case, trying to
Mhm.
recall your medical history, understanding, the scope of what the evaluation's supposed to be about, what the doctor is supposed to be doing to do their job, and
Yeah.
really getting yourself prepared so that when you go in, you know what to expect. Two, if possible, you can hold the doctor accountable. And three, you know what's going to come afterwards. And so really, not just treating the QME evaluation like it's just another evaluation in your case and it's not a big deal because, really it's everything, and we've seen clients who have picked really poor QMEs and they haven't really prepared. They go to the evaluation and the doctor railroads them and there's really not much, if anything, that can be done about it.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate. So, and I get it, there's a lot of people who don't understand this stuff. It certainly took me a while, even practicing workers' compensation law, to kind of understand the game that goes into the QMEs themselves.
Right. What about deadlines? Can you talk a little bit about the deadlines that happen within QME? Because I think there's also pitfalls that come from missing deadlines or not going to your appointment, you know?
Of course. Um, when we talk about the QME responsibilities of the doctor themselves, we talk about their evaluation timelines, right? When they can see you. We talk about when their reports are due. After an initial evaluation, the report needs to be done within 30 days. If it's a supplemental report, meaning additional information was provided to the doctor after the evaluation, to write a follow-up report. Common
Mhm.
example of this is you see someone who's gone to an evaluation. The doctor does an evaluation and says, hey, this person had an MRI that I want to see before I write my final report, or hey, I think this person needs a MRI before I write a final report. Person gets the MRI, or the MRI is provided to the QME evaluator. The QME then writes a supplemental report addressing their findings. When you have a supplemental report, it's due within 60 days. So there's a timeline. Initial evaluation is 30 days. Supplemental report is 60 days. Now, if the doctor misses the evaluation report deadline, technically you're allowed to replace them. You're allowed to kick them off the case. So that is an important deadline to keep in mind. If you saw the doctor, it's been 62 days since your evaluation, they haven't written a report, that would be grounds to actually replace the QME. So if you got a bad doctor, keep tabs on that. The QME process itself does have strict timelines for when you request the QME panel, which you have to do depending on the type of issue you're dealing with, whether it's a claim denial or an objection to a treating physician report. But afterwards, really, once a QME is on a case, if they're late for things like supplemental reports, it's very hard to get rid of them. The judges will typically give them quite a bit of leeway. The more involved they are in a case for a longer period of time, it becomes harder and harder to replace them, depending on what's going on in the case.
Right. Okay. So these are very important details that we want you to take into consideration. Again, the insurance company is not going to tell you this. They're going to be like, oh, too bad. So sad. You missed it. Or you didn't say X, Y, and Z was hurting as well. So that's not on the report. We did mention it earlier in the slides. If you guys were able to read some of the slides, there is this part right here that it says, if, if it's not in the record, it may not exist to the evaluator, which is why it's important for you guys to truly pay attention to this appointment of the qualified medical evaluator. We've actually made it easier for them, Bilal. The entire team has created a checklist that if you registered through our webinar registration, you're going to get in an email. It's this entire checklist that's going to help kind of make sure you cross all the I's, all the T's, and dot all the I's, and make sure that you really are on, a winning strategy, I guess you can say, for the opportunity to truly be able to be successful in your claims. So For those of you that are interested in getting this checklist and you're watching live on YouTube, make sure you guys go on the chat and we'd be more than happy to also send it to you once we are done with the webinar. So dates, obviously we talked about this, Bilal, knowing every deadline, setting alerts. I don't know, if you are a hard sleeper, make sure you put like 10 alarms. Like, make sure you have your friends sleep over so that they can wake you up. Obviously, confirming that, your doctor matches your injuries, because that'd be so hilarious if you are, dealing with a foot issue and you end up getting a hand doctor and it's just like, what? Completely different. Obviously, there's a lot of documents that go into place as well. So I think it's important to know what documents you need to take. Keep your story straight. I've also heard you say this in the podcast. So for those of you that don't know, Bilal and I also host a weekly podcast where we discuss topics regarding to workers' comp. So we've talked about this, Bilal, in some of the episodes where we say people just, if you're lying, you could tell automatically because the story just changes drastically. They forget about what they said in the first time. So storylines and just knowing that your story sticks and that it's the same is also very important. So yes, we're going to be sending everyone this checklist on an email for those of you that want it. Let's talk about, Bilal, what happens if you already messed up. Like, oops, I already did one of these things. What, as an attorney, as someone who does this, what would you tell a client that has missed a deadline or gotten the wrong doctor? Like, please guide us. What happens?
So, starting the QME process itself is pretty forgiving, depending on the situation you're in. Of course, you could certainly waive your right to a QME if you wait too long. So, potentially you could be in a situation where you either waited too long or you're not using the right objection or process to request your QME. But for the most part, getting the process together is pretty straightforward and fairly forgiving. The medical record side is always important. When the carrier has a QME evaluation scheduled, it is their legal responsibility to provide any and all relevant medical records to the evaluator. It is not the injured worker's responsibility. So remember that. The injured worker can provide medical records to the QME, but they are not required to. And so to some extent, you can rely on the fact that the QME should get all the records from the insurance company. So I'm just saying that so you guys don't have to stress out about wondering, hey, I've been to 50 different doctors over the last 3 years. How is it that I know how to get everything? How am I going to do that? Where am I going to go to get the records? Who do I talk to? What if I miss something? It's the carrier's responsibility, and they should have everything. And not only that, but when the QME gets the records, they should be provided what's called a medical record index, which is an outline of everything that's provided to the QME. And that's something that you can ask for from the insurance carrier themselves, and they should be able to provide that to you. And so that outline, that index will list basically anything and everything that was provided to the QME, which is important for you to look at because you may realize looking at that they've missed half of your doctors. Or, you've had diagnostic studies like EMGs or MRIs that are incredibly important to the issues in your case. And so you do want to make sure that everything that's relevant should be provided and is provided to the QME before you actually get there. I'm sure there's people here. I know I've come across this in multiple cases where QME sees our client. Afterwards, they said, hey, I never got any medical records. And that's obviously a big problem because ultimately the QME can't do what they need to do without your medical history. And so to the extent possible before your evaluation, assuming you're on your own, you pick the greatest doctor possible and you don't need help or anything, I hope, at least do that. Make sure they've got all the medical records ahead of time.
Yeah.
To the extent they don't, you can clean things up with what's called a supplemental report, meaning asking the doctor after the evaluation to review additional materials, whether it's a job description, a medical report, a consult evaluation report, a post-operative surgical report, whatever it is. Those can be provided to the QME and have the QME weigh in after the fact. Of course, the sooner the better. You don't want to have something done, have an evaluation and then wait 3 years to try and ask the QME to comment on it. Obviously, the QME.
I love how you said wait 3 years.
Well, sometimes, people don't know how to handle the situation. They just get the QME report and think it is what it is, unfortunately. But you do have to kind of act expeditiously when you get these reports that may be missing information, because sometimes the QME won't say, hey, I'm missing X, Y, and Z. They'll just write the report with what they got and based
Yeah.
on their evaluation of you. And to the extent they have an incorrect medical history or they're missing documents, that may not be something that either they pick up on or care to address. And so you may be left out and left behind because you didn't ensure that those things were actually provided to the doctor for the evaluation.
Right. And just in a general idea for those of you guys that are on the webinar live right now with us, this is only one specific part of a workers' comp claim. So there is a monstrosity of other things that happen, delays that happen, mistakes that can happen, which is why I'm always just surprised, shocked how people are willing to, like, you know what? I'm just going to tackle and tough this up on my own and figure it out, all while I'm getting better, all while I'm recovering and trying to focus on getting back to work or getting back to as much as possible as I can as I was prior to the injury or the illness, right? It's a lot of back and forth calling. It's a lot of documentation that you also have to get. Hint, hint, get a free consultation. Join an amazing team that is going to do all of that for you in the back end so that all you can do and focus on is truly your body, your pain, not to be stressed, and to know that you're doing the things right, having that peace of mind. I don't care what anything charges, just to know that I don't have to deal with this waking me up in the middle of the night. Bet your butt I would do it 100%. Again, this is just one section of what a workers' comp claim can potentially go into, right? Not all of them. There's some really easy ones that kind of navigate through the system, right, Bilal? That they're just in and out. Everything runs smoothly. But it's when these things get complicated and when things start seeing off that you need to get legal help. How often would you say on a case, Bilal, that you are representing, does the insurance company have their own attorney handling their stuff?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I would say more often than not, and it usually just depends on when. Typically, there are some adjusters who are career adjusters. They've been at the same insurance company for 30 plus years. They've been doing this long enough. Quite frankly, a lot of times they may know as much as I do, because they've dedicated their entire career to it, and they've done a really good job of learning and understanding the laws and applying them day in, day out. So they know what they're doing. Right.
Right.
There's other adjusters, and I would say most adjusters who do not handle claims themselves, and say, the large majority of cases are handled by defense attorneys, either what we call in-house counsel, meaning the legal department of the insurance company that hires lawyers internally, or it's referred out to private defense firms who specialize in workers' compensation.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So we've made a scenario of a case story that maybe you could share with us, Bilal. But I think overall, it's really important for people to know, don't wait until you get that response, or don't wait until you get that letter, or for things to get worse to take an action on what truly is your right. So I was wondering if I could pick your brain, Bilal, and you can share a story where someone was about to choose the wrong doctor. I'm pretty sure you have plenty of those stories that we would love to hear, so that we know we are dealing with this and it does happen and you've handled it before.
Yeah, of course. So there are loopholes to get out of a bad QME, provided you haven't actually gone to the QME evaluation yet. So if you've got a QME panel, you've already gone down that process, but you haven't actually been to the evaluation, even if it's scheduled, you can still technically get out of the evaluation by virtue of the fact that you're hiring a lawyer. Lawyer gets to say that this panel was requested while this person did not have a lawyer, and therefore they get a replacement panel just by default. So if you already got a panel and you're nervous about it and you're not sure and you want help and you change your mind, we can still help you and get away from that bad QME.
Woohoo!
And so there are a lot of clients who call us because they get this QME in the mail, either because they requested it or because the insurance did, and they panic and they're not sure what to do. And so they'll call us and say, hey, I got this QME, how do I get out of it? And we say, great, we've got you, right? If you sign up with us or any other law firm for that matter, the lawyer gets to say this panel is invalid and start the process again, which gives you a fresh shot. One story in particular, there was a client who came to us who got their QME panel, and I won't name names for the evaluator. I'm not here to badmouth them per se. But I had known this evaluator from other cases. They were a former director for what at the time was US HealthWorks, which is now Concentra. They acquired them for several $100 million in a transaction a few years ago. And Concentra, formerly US HealthWorks, is the biggest industrial workers' comp medical provider for workers' compensation cases here in California. They're the preferred provider for obvious reasons that, and I say preferred provider, talking about the insurance company, not injured workers. But their former director is also a licensed QME evaluator and happened to be on this woman's panel. So, luckily she came to us in time where I could get a new panel, because there was a high likelihood she would have gone to see this evaluator who would have tanked her case 100%. And I know that because I've deposed this QME before. I've cross-examined him under oath. I've questioned him by writing requests for supplemental reports. And he is a firm insurance company believer.
Wow.
He's on their side. And so, I helped her dodge a bullet, which was, great for her, great for the case.
Right. Of course. Okay. That's good. Thank you for sharing that story with us. We have another case scenario that we've put up, and I'm pretty sure you have a story to share about this. Can you share a case story where there was missing history medical records, which, by the way, when you hire an attorney, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bilal, as the attorneys, let's say that it's been, like, for example, sometimes you request your medical records as a patient. It takes forever for them to get back to you. There's a massive people and wait line to get your records. As an attorney, you guys can just go ahead and subpoena the medical clinic to give up those medical records, right? So that kind of saves time.
Correct. Yeah. As officers of the court, us lawyers have what's called subpoena power, meaning we can request or order that certain insurance companies, medical providers, employers provide us with records. And so we have subpoena power to request pretty much anything and everything relevant to your workers' compensation case. So, to the extent that you've been injured and you've had treatment in multiple locations and facilities, we're able to subpoena those records to provide them to the QME, or for whatever other reason we'd use them in your workers' compensation case. At no cost to you, no stress to you either. All you have to do is tell us where you've been, and we'll go out and get all the records on your behalf without any problems.
Is that faster than if I go do it on my own?
I would like to say yes, but
keeping it honest. Okay, fair enough.
No. I just had this example, to be honest. A client of mine, we're trying to settle her medical care, and we need to do what's called a Medicare set aside. It's a special thing. I won't go into the details about it here, but part of doing this is we need to gather her medical treatment records for the last 2 years. My client had been to a Walgreens pharmacy to fill all her medications, and to get these medical records from her pharmacy, in order to subpoena them, we have to serve Walgreens corporate office and go through their legal department and blah, 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 right? So it is a long process. Whereas I talked to my client, I said, look, client, this is going to take a long time for us. We'll do it. It'll be thorough. It'll be comprehensive, but we'll get everything. Or how close do you live to your pharmacy? Oh, I live 5 minutes. I was going to go there tomorrow anyways. Cool. Can you please ask your pharmacist for a printout of all your medications from the last 2 years? Yeah, no problem. Okay. She able to get that to me in like a week. So, in some circumstances that can be easier. Depending if it's employment records, for example, your wage and hour records, or if you're fighting a wrongful term case or discrimination case, the subpoena is not the same as you simply requesting your records, because when the subpoena goes out, the record keeper, the facility, has to certify under oath that they provided all of the records they have. And to the extent they do not, or they're hiding things, they can get in serious trouble, either for perjury, or they can have certain documents limited or excluded from trial or being provided to a QME because they didn't comply honestly with our subpoena. So, the subpoena sometimes could take longer, but it also is more thorough, and it has legal repercussions too. Right. So, depending on what's going on in the case, a subpoena is certainly something that is a powerful tool to help you, and just to ensure compliance and to make sure that you're getting everything from wherever you're looking.
Right. Well, I can fairly tell you these 2 clients of yours took a very important step, and that was hiring an attorney to take care of some of the stuff. So again, each of these stories that you shared, thank you so much. They share this practical step, an important step for them to be able to successfully navigate the system, which, by the way, we're going to show you guys the QR code on the screen. If you guys are interested at the end of this webinar, which we're almost done, I promise you the next part is the Q&A section. If you guys want to scan the QR code, it'll take you directly to the priority line, bypass all of the just the way that the system works, and it'll connect you directly with one of our intake specialists. I would highly recommend that if you have specific questions regarding your case, because every case is different. So you can also call in if you don't want to do a video call. You can also call the office and the phone number that's going to be on the screen as well. And that way you guys can schedule a call with one of our experts who will lovely and happily guide you through the entire process as far as what your options are, and come up with a strategy more than anything that is going to help you navigate the system in an effective way. So finally, the Q&A session is here. I do want to encourage everyone to go on the chat, whether you're on YouTube Live, just go ahead on the comments below. We can see them here as well. And if you're joining us through the live webinars link, then also put your question for us. And Bilal is definitely going to answer these Q&A for you. So we also have the final 4 steps for you to just make sure you sign up for the emails with us as well, so you get that checklist. We have an ebook that talks about kind of like what the entire workers' comp flow looks like. It does have a lot of tips in it as well. We can provide that for you. But Bilal, let's ask the listeners or people who are watching if they have any questions to post on the chat. I do see Jesucito was on here, and he was very active. It looks like he actually went to a doctor's appointment. But he probably connected with our team. So if you're watching live on YouTube and you have questions for us in regards to workers' comp, please let us know, and we'll be happy to answer some of those questions. While we wait for these questions, Bilal, is there anything else you would like to share regarding QMEs that we did not share in this webinar that's important?
Yeah, I think, well, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. The QME is really important in your case. And you have to understand that the QMEs have responsibilities, just like any other doctor. And you have to understand what these responsibilities are and how important they are to your case when you're going to the evaluation. A lot of those regarding, having to review comprehensive medical records. Also, the biggest one I see is having to address all the body parts. When you go to a QME, they are legally obligated to address any and all body parts or injuries that are claimed on one or more claim forms. So, a big problem I see with people going to QMEs and not really understanding that responsibility is that they'll say, you know what, QME, I hurt my back, my neck, and the shoulder. And the QME says, sorry, I'm only here to evaluate your back. And that is a big problem in workers' comp. The QME will often limit the scope of the evaluation artificially beyond what the injuries are actually supposed to be. So, you really want to be able to understand these laws so that you can not only advocate for yourself, but also to hold the QME accountable and to find these issues and mistakes that happen throughout the evaluation process, so that if you're doing this on your own, you can point them out to a judge. Or if you have an attorney, you can work with the attorney to ensure that these things are taken care of and addressed in a timely manner that will actually help out your case. So, I think understanding what the QME's role is, why it's so important, and what their actual responsibilities are, which, I think it's probably a longer conversation than we have time for today to actually go through each and everything a QME is supposed to do. But really, I think that's why it's, important to also potentially consult with a lawyer if you're at this point in the process, to understand what's going to happen and how you hold the QME accountable when you get there.
Got it. Yeah, that's super, super important. Okay. Well, it doesn't seem like we have any questions coming in at the moment, but I do have questions that we have had throughout the entire process of our podcast that I would like to share. And one of those questions says, what if I already went through my QME process and I have a percentage? Am I screwed?
I mean, yes and no, it depends. Really, if the QME gave you a fair rating, then it is what it is. You know, a lot of times people do go down the QME route by themselves and they get an okay QME. And they get a rating that is reasonably accurate. The QMEs use something called the AMA Guides for Rating Impairment, which are basically a big green book that tells you essentially what percentage of impairment you have for certain body parts or conditions or functional limitations. And the QME is supposed to use the AMA guides in order to rate your impairment as accurately as possible. So they may say, hey, you've had total knee replacement, so you have X percentage of disability, or you have, you know, this percentage lack of range of motion in your shoulder following surgery, so now you have this impairment. And our job is really to ensure that the QME is giving you the best rating possible using the AMA guides for actually rating impairment. So, you know, I'd say in that particular case, it depends on whether or not we feel like the QME did an adequate job in addressing your impairment, whether we feel like they addressed all the body parts that they needed to, or in fact, whether they addressed the impairment too early. You know, impairment's supposed to be addressed at the end of a case once you've medically plateaued, meaning that you're not going to get any better. So if you have a pending surgery that's going to be a big deal and they said you have a disability rating already, go back to work, you're done, it might be premature. So we have to look at a lot of different factors in addressing that. It's certainly not the end of the case, you know, depending on what's going on, but I would say it really depends on the report itself, you know, what's going on in the case, big picture for us to say whether or not you're screwed. If it's a really bad report, you know, sometimes it can be difficult because, you know, a lot of these QMEs, they're practicing physicians. They've been doing this a very long time. They're experts. You know, you have an orthopedic surgeon who's done thousands of surgeries over the past 30 years. They know what they're talking about medically. And so to the extent they write a bad report and they're out to get you, it can be very difficult to undo that. They know how to explain themselves. They know how to articulate their thoughts and feelings, right or wrong. And it can be very difficult to kind of have a bad position with a bad QME. Not impossible, but it depends.
Right. Okay. So it looks like Karen wrote in a question. It says, I thought things were going well, if very slowly. QME says report too thin to support the QME's ratings, which is weird because the employer already agreed. How do I hold the QME accountable? What are my options?
Yeah, so this is something pretty common, actually, Karen. Thanks for bringing this up. You know, QMEs, there's a licensing process to become a QME. It often entails just some basic coursework on how to write a report. And that's kind of it, some, you know, training, and then you're off to the races. There's a lot of QMEs that look at the QME evaluation process is a volume business, meaning the more QMEs I can stick into a day, the more I can get paid. There's also QMEs that just aren't good at writing reports. You know, they write a very short report. They write a report, you know, regarding permanent disability that's, you know, one sentence. It just says, this person has 50% disability because they hurt their back, you know, and that's it. There's no explanation. There's no reference to the AMA guide, you know. So I think when you're talking about a QME report that's too thin, I'm assuming that they're perhaps articulating that one of those reports popped into the case, meaning, you know, it's a very short report. The QME's opinions are really conclusive without a lot of justification or discussion behind them, which are things that the judge ultimately in a workers' compensation case is probably going to look for. You know, if the QME gives an opinion about something, the QME is going to want to back it up. Although I can say with certainty, a discussion about permanent disability doesn't require all that much. You know, they're supposed to articulate which table and section of the AMA guides they're referring to, why they gave you the impairment they did, outlining what the conditions are in the medical report to substantiate the conditions and things like that. So depending on what the issue is in the case, you know, I could see a report being too thin if it doesn't have a really thorough discussion, although that is usually easily correctable by a request for a supplemental report. So if, for example, the QME said, hey, I think you have a rating of 25% and the standard rating is 10%, I'm going to give you the higher rating, 25%. you can write a request to a supplemental report to the QME to say, hey, QME, thanks for giving me 25%. Can you please explain why you think the higher rating is more appropriate? And so usually a request for supplemental report is the best way to kind of, clean things up. So, I would say at that point, a request for supplemental report is probably what you should do depending on what the issue is. But again, I would want to know more about what it is that they're referring to that's too thin. And oftentimes, look, adjusters will say, I disagree with this report. And it's like a kid, right? They're stomping their feet. They're, holding their breath till their face turns blue, hoping it'll kind of just go away on its own. In reality, sometimes they just don't like the report, but the report is good. So I would say don't let the adjuster necessarily shake your confidence if you're happy with the report. But again, without seeing the report, it'd be hard for me to tell you whether or not I think it's actually a solid report or not.
Got it. Okay, so we have 2 final questions on here. And then I do want to remind whoever's watching the live webinar, we do have the consultation rooms available now. So if you guys want to join now and kind of dig deeper into your specific case and strategies that you can potentially take to successfully navigate the workers' comp case or claim or world or system, there's a QR code on the screen. You guys can scan that QR code. It'll take you directly into the priority line, the VIP access for the experts that are waiting for your call behind the scenes. But yeah, scan it, get your questions in there if you don't want to share them, because it's a lot of personal information that we're, I guess, showing through this webinar on the chats. But yeah, it says right here, why would an insurance company stop sending your PPD biweekly checks after a judge findings an award when they stated they wanted to negotiate for CNR? Ooh, I've seen that question before.
So this is a pretty long, this would take me a while to answer this in a lot of detail. It's super dependent on what's going on in your case. Let's say you have a findings and award and you have a permanent disability percentage that's associated with your case. That permanent disability percentage has a monetary value attached to it if it's anything more than 0%. And the insurance company pays out your permanent disability in biweekly payments till it's all paid out. And so you may have reached the point where the percentage of permanent disability that you were awarded has been paid out to you, in which case the payments would stop. Of course, a compromising release settlement for the remainder of your case, let's say they want to buy out your future medical care, can be negotiated any time. So for example, if you have a findings and award for a permanent disability as well as future medical care, whether it's 1 year, it's 2 years, or 10 years down the road, you still potentially can negotiate a settlement of your future medical care with the insurance company. So just because there's a findings and award doesn't mean that the settlement for the rest of the case is necessarily off the table. It's just where you're at in the case and whether or not they're still interested in negotiating after your findings and award that would matter. But presumably, if your permanent disability payments have stopped after an award, it means that everything they've paid you or owed you is actually paid out. Usually that's the case, but without knowing more, that's the best I can give you. Hope that answered the question.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Bilal, for taking your time and answering these questions. Karen, we're just going to answer Karen's last little question. It says, following up to my previous question, would I call the QME or does the request have to come from the insurance or,
It depends on the issue. There are some things that are what we say is the applicant's burden, meaning the applicant has the burden to prove up permanent disability. They have a burden to prove injury, AOE, COE, meaning happening at work. Apportionment, which is the idea that some of your injury should be attributable to things other than your work injury, which is an insurance company favorite because it reduces the value of your case. Apportionment is the defendant's burden, the insurance company's burden. So, depending on what the issue is, you may not necessarily be the one that kind of digs your own grave, right? If the insurance company is not happy with the doctor's opinion regarding apportionment, you may not want to clear that up on your own because you're helping prove their case, for example.
Of course.
Again,
support them.
Yeah. And so the request for a supplemental report from, the QME is something that either party can do. It's a written request to the QME requests for supplemental reports have to be served on the opposing side. If you're providing any information to the QME, it needs to be served on the other side first, and you have to wait the certain period of time for them to object to it potentially. But yeah, you would request a supplemental report to the QME, and it's not a state form or anything like that. Oftentimes, it's just a handwritten, not a handwritten, sorry, a type letter. Yeah, we're not in 1970 anymore. It's
I'm gonna literally just type, give me this.
I've seen it. I've seen handwritten letters to QMEs and stuff, so it's certainly possible. But yeah, depending on who the issue is favorable to, you may not want to address it. So I'd say it depends on the issue. But yeah, it's a request for supplemental report that you would do or that the insurance company would do, depending on what the issue is.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bilal, for answering these questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have a podcast, and Bilal loves to jump in on the comments as well and answer these questions for you. So if you are on YouTube, make sure you follow us, Work Comp Talk Podcast. We talk about weekly subjects that are regarding the workers' comp system. And then on top of that, we also have the Pacific Workers channel, which is the law firm's channel. And we have a ton of information on there as well. You guys can
Carmen,
go.
I think we do have one more question here that maybe we
Sure.
missed. I just want to make sure I didn't ignore everyone here. I think this person had asked about getting the QME panel. They were sent the form, it looks like, and they were told they only have 10 days to fill out. And so the question is, I guess, what if they have an attorney? Again, the QME process can start at any time. Once you're represented, that changes. So, if you haven't done it yet, you don't necessarily have to. The attorney can do it for you. So I would say it depends on what's going on in the case. But, I think this just highlights one of the other situations in workers' comp where a lot of people feel pressured in workers' comp because there are deadlines and, they can affect your case in a major way.
Mm-hmm.
And, these deadlines come fast. And when you're faced with situations like, well, what QME do I pick? Or when do I fill out the form? If I don't fill out the form, am I waiving my right to this thing? What specialty do I pick? And you literally have, sometimes only a couple days to figure it out. It can be really stressful.
Yeah.
So I'd say if you're being told you need to go to a QME by the insurance adjuster, I would just reach out to an attorney. Again, whether it's us or someone else, don't let them pressure you, and make sure, this is something we deal with all the time. So, if I get told I need to go to a QME on a case, I'm like happy and I can do it. It's no problem. I know who to pick. I know what to do. It's simple. But if you've never been through this before, it can be stressful, especially if the insurance adjuster is telling you things that you're not sure are actually legally appropriate.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for catching that question. I've missed it. Again, if you want to be able to get that checklist that we talked about earlier, you're definitely going to want to check out the replay on your email. If you signed up with the entire flow for the webinar, you're going to get the replay email. If you're on YouTube, please send us a comment. We'll be more than happy to send it for you as well. And yeah, don't forget that there's a lot of information coming down for you in the webinars replays as well. And the lines for you to be able to contact and hit that priority line for our intake specialists to be able to answer some of your questions specific to your case, those are definitely going to be available even after the webinar finishes. So please feel free, if right now you can't necessarily connect with us because either you're at work, you got to get back to work, and we went over a little bit past your lunchtime, go ahead and, take this with you, and you're going to get emails, and you can rewatch this on YouTube as many times as you want to go back and highlight some of the most important moments on here. But Bilal, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate the time that we've spent in this webinar, and I know we're going to do this again next month. So if you guys want us to talk specifically about something for next month's webinar, drop it in the comments and we'll try to make it happen for you. We'll catch you guys on the next Work Comp Talk webinar. And thank you. We hope you enjoy and have a good rest of your day.